I moved to Lagos when I was 19, fresh out of secondary school. No university degree, just my WAEC certificate with 3 Fs in it and some basic computer training I picked up at a cyber cafe back home. I learned typing, small Excel, small word processing, enough to convince an employer that I could handle office work. When I first arrived in Lagos, I stayed with my friend, sharing a room with her while I searched for work. The search was humbling in a way nothing back home had prepared me for. I went from office to office, dropping CVs that probably ended in the trash before I even left the building. Because what use does a company have for a girl with only a WAEC certificate when graduates are dropping their CVs in the same place? I remember the shame of those days, trekking under the sun because I couldn't always afford transport fare. The way security men at gates would look at me like I was wasting their time. The hunger I sometimes swallowed because I didn't want my friend to feel burdened by my presence. After 4 months of that kind of struggle, a family friend mentioned a small marketing company that was looking for an office assistant. Nothing fancy, just someone to answer phone calls, file documents, serve tea and water to visitors, run errands when needed. The pay was modest, barely above minimum wage, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. I went for the interview wearing a borrowed blouse from my friend and a skirt I had ironed 3 times to make sure there was no single wrinkle on it. I remember sitting in that waiting area, my palms were sweating, rehearsing answers to questions I wasn't even sure they would ask. Hi besties, you're welcome back to my channel, and if this is your first time here, my name is Pressy Patrick and here I read out true life stories about people's experience. So if this is what you like, please consider subscribing to my channel, okay? Like this video, share with your loved ones, and remember to turn on the notification bell so that whenever I post, you'll be the first to get notified. Now let's continue. The interview was conducted by the HR officer, but at the end, the branch manager himself came out briefly to observe. That was the first time I saw Josh. I won't lie and pretend it was love at first sight, because honestly, what I felt that day was something closer to nervous awareness. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'9", with a build that suggested he used to be more athletic in his younger years, but had since settled into the comfortable weight of someone who could afford good food and didn't have time for the gym. He had a bald head he kept neatly shaved to disguise it, a strong jaw, and eyes that, when they fell on you, made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He asked me one question during that brief appearance. Why do you think you deserve this opportunity over the other candidates? And I remember the answer I gave him, an answer that probably saved my life in some ways and ruined it in other ways. I told him, sir, I don't have the certificate that other candidates have, but I have something they might not have. I will work harder than anyone else here because I have nothing to fall back on if I fail. He smiled at that, a small, almost private smile, like I had said something that genuinely amused him. 2 days later, I got the call that I was employed. My first few months at the company were filled with the kind of nervous diligence you expect from someone terrified of losing the only stable income she had. I arrived very early and left late. I learned every staff member's name and preference within the first 2 weeks. Who took their tea with 2 sugars, who liked extra milk, who needed reminding about meetings because they always forgot. I wasn't trying to be remarkable, I was trying to be necessary, because in my mind, the more necessary I made myself, the harder it would be for anyone to let me go. My boss noticed. Of course he noticed. He was the kind of manager who paid attention to details others overlooked. And within my first month, he started calling me to his office more frequently than the role probably required. At first, it was strictly professional. Jane, type this memo for me. Jane, can you arrange these files by date? Jane, sit down for a second. I want your opinion on something. That last phrase, I want your opinion on something, became something I both anticipated and feared, because it always meant extended time alone with him, time that slowly began stretching beyond what office work demanded. I remember the first time he told me something personal. It was a Friday evening. The office had mostly emptied out, and I was tidying the reception area before heading home. He called me into his office under pretense of needing help finding a file. When I got there, the file conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes before he leaned back in his chair and said, almost out of nowhere, "Do you know, Jane, sometimes this job is the easiest part of my life." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just said, "Sir." He laughed, a short, harmless laugh, and said, "My wife and I, we don't really talk anymore. Not really talk. I mean, we resist in the same house, but it's like living with a roommate who happens to share my surname. She's like a stranger to me." He looked at me then, searching my face for some reaction, and I remember feeling a strange mixture of pity and curiosity. Pity because no one deserves a marriage that feels like a roommate arrangement. I became curious because some small foolish part of me wondered what it would be like to be the woman who made him feel less alone and happy. I began to imagine how his wife was so cruel to a sweet man like Josh. I told him I was sorry to hear that, and he waved it off, saying I shouldn't mind him, that he was just having one of those reflective evenings. But after that conversation, something shifted between us. The professional barrier that had existed, thin as it was, began to erode steadily. Over the following weeks, Josh's attention towards me intensified in small, almost imperceptible ways. He started complimenting things that had nothing to do with my work. The way I tied my headscarf, the dress I wore, the way I laughed at something a colleague said. He began finding reasons to walk past my desk more often, to linger a few extra seconds when handing me documents, to ask if I had eaten lunch. If I said no, he would send someone to buy food for me without asking what I wanted, as if he already knew what I wanted. He would gift me 5,000 naira every week just to recharge my phone, buys me perfume, and said it was appreciation for my hard work. I accepted them, telling myself there was nothing wrong with an employer appreciating a diligent staff member. But deep down, I knew exactly what was happening. I knew where this road led, and I knew I wasn't running from it. I told my friend about everything, and she looked at me and said, "Look, babe, you better grab this opportunity. Milk him dry and enjoy yourself." How many men are generous these days, except for Yahoo boys? I listened to her advice and became more close to my boss and would wear things that would seduce him more. The first time my boss held my hand was on a Thursday evening, about 3 months into my employment. I had stayed back to finish typing some reports he needed for an early morning meeting the following day. By the time I finished, it was past 8 at night, and the office was empty except for 2 of us and the security man at the gate. Josh came out of his office, saw me still at my desk, and instead of simply collecting the documents and leaving, he pulled a chair beside mine and sat down very close to me. "You work too hard for someone they're not paying enough," he said, rubbing my back. I felt chills but didn't move away. I remembered my friend's advice to seize the opportunity. I laughed nervously and said something about needing the job so bad, about not having the luxury of working any other way. He listened, nodding slowly, and then he reached out and took my hand in his, gently as if testing whether I would pull away, but I didn't pull away. He told me in a low voice, whispering into my ear, that he had been thinking about me a lot, that something about my presence in the office had changed things for him in ways he couldn't fully explain, that he knew it was complicated given his situation, but he couldn't keep pretending he didn't feel something. I remember my heart pounding so hard I thought he could hear it. I remember the guilt that flickered briefly, the image of his wife I had never met but somehow already felt I was wronging this innocent woman. And I remember pushing that guilt aside because in that moment, being wanted by this powerful, gentle-spoken man felt more important than anything in the world. That night, we didn't do anything beyond holding hands and talking until almost 10 o'clock. But something had shifted permanently. The line had been crossed in spirit, even if not yet in body, and I left the office that evening feeling a strange, intoxicating mixture of guilt and excitement. I just waved everything off and said to myself, or die not die. I'm not stealing anybody's husband. I am just borrowing him. The weeks following that evening felt like I was living a double life. And honestly, there was a strange thrill in that. By day, I was Jane at the office, dutiful and polite to everyone, including Josh, in front of other staff. But underneath that surface, something entirely different was building. I would catch his eye across the office during a meeting and feel my whole body respond, even though outwardly I kept my face perfectly composed. The first time we slept together was about a month after that evening we held hands. He had asked me to accompany him to deliver some documents to a client's office in another company, and on the way back, instead of returning to the office, he drove to a hotel. I just sat in the car pretending not to know what was going on. I remember the nervousness in my stomach as we walked into the hotel. I remember thinking, even as we climbed the stairs, that I should turn back, that I should tell him this was a mistake and was wrong, that I was setting myself up for heartbreak in a situation I had no real control over. I just wanted to tell him he's married and to leave me alone, but I couldn't. I didn't turn back. What happened in that room that day, I won't describe in detail because some things should remain private. But I will say this, after we finished our dirty acts, lying there with my head on his chest, listening to his heartbeats, I felt something I had never felt before. A sense of being chosen, of mattering to someone powerful, of having value beyond what my certificate could ever measure. It was intoxicating, but I felt powerful. He told me that day as we lay in the hotel room that his wife no longer had sexual urge after their second child was born, that the spark between them had died years ago. He told me he felt trapped in a marriage that looked perfect from the outside, a successful husband, beautiful wife, 2 healthy children, but felt boring from within. I believed every word. I wanted to believe every word because believing it made what we were doing feel less like betrayal and more like rescue from his boring marriage, as if I was saving him from a prison. After that night, that was when the main gifting started. My boss showered me with gifts and money. I mean, a lot of money. I was so happy, and my friend was happy for me too and kept encouraging me to take all his money. It didn't take long for gossip to start circulating around the office. I started to notice the way conversations would pause slightly when I walked past certain groups of colleagues, the way some of the older women in accounts would look at me with a mixture of pity and disdain, the way a particular driver named Kata would smirk whenever Josh asked him to take the rest of the day off after dropping documents somewhere, knowing fully well it meant Josh wanted privacy with me. I remember the first time someone said something directly to my face. It was a woman named Patricia who worked in another department. She cornered me in the small kitchen area one afternoon while I was preparing tea and said without any fear, "My sister, be careful. Men like Oga Josh, they will use you, and when the story finished, they will go back to where their bread is buttered." I remember feeling a flash of anger at her words, not because they were untrue, but because they articulated a fear I had been actively suppressing. I told her I didn't know what she was talking about and denied everything, telling her to mind her business, that Josh and I were simply close because of work demands. And she just looked at me with an expression that said she didn't believe a single word, but she just let it go. There were other comments too, less direct but equally cutting. People started calling me PA to Josh in a tone that wasn't about my actual title but was loaded with implication. Someone left a note on my desk once. I never found out who. The note simply said, "Respect yourself," in scribbled handwriting. I cried in the bathroom that day because even though I told myself I didn't care what people thought, the truth was that judgment cut deep, especially because some small part of me agreed with them. But I had already gone too far down this road to turn back. I had built my entire sense of stability around Josh's attention, his money, his gifts, and his promises. Walking away would have meant confronting the emptiness of my situation. I don't have any degree. My family back home were depending on whatever small money I could send to them. So I stayed and I pushed forward. And I told myself that whatever judgment people passed on me, I would prove them wrong by becoming someone too valuable to dismiss. About a year and a half into my employment, the assistant branch manager resigns to start his own company. His departure created a vacancy that, under normal circumstances, would have gone to someone with proper qualifications, a degree, relevant certifications, years of formal experience. I had none of these things. What I had was my private part and Josh. And Josh had decided, in his own quiet, deliberate way, that I would be the one to fill that position. I remember the conversations he had with me about it, late at night on the phone. His voice was low so his wife wouldn't overhear from another room. "Jane, I want you in that role," he told me one night. "You understand the business better than half of the graduates we have here. You just need the title to match what you already do." I was so happy. Part of me desperately wanted the position, the prestige, the salary increase, the validation of being recognized as more than just an assistant. But another part of me, a part I tried to silence, knew that accepting this promotion through Josh's influence would only deepen the perception that I was nothing more than his mistress, climbing the ladder through the bedroom rather than through merit. Thank God you know. I voiced this concern to him once, afraid he would think I was ungrateful. I told him people would talk even more than they already did, that the position required someone with proper qualifications, that giving it to me might create resentment among staff who had worked harder and longer for less recognition. His response has stayed with me ever since. He said, "Jane, life is not fair and people will talk regardless of what you do. The question is whether you want to spend your life worrying about what people say, or whether you want to take what's being offered to you. I'm offering you a chance most people in your position would kill for. So just accept it, my baby. I would even give you a higher position in the future." That conversation settled something in me. I decided, perhaps foolishly, perhaps out of genuine desperation, that I would take what was being offered regardless of the cost of my reputation. Within 3 weeks, I was officially announced as the new assistant branch manager. The day of the announcement remains in my memory. Josh gathered the staff in the main office area and made the announcement himself, praising my dedication, my work ethics, my natural aptitudes for leadership, despite limited formal education. A phrase that, even as he said it with what I believed was genuine admiration, still stung because it acknowledged the very weakness people would use against me. The silence that followed in his announcement was deafening. A few people clapped weakly, more out of obligation than enthusiasm. I remember scanning the room and seeing expressions ranging from poorly disguised resentment to disbelief. One girl didn't even pretend to clap. She simply turned and walked back to her desk, shaking her head slightly. The months following my promotion were some of the most psychological difficult of my entire time at the company. I had to navigate supervising people who had years of formal education than me. People who clearly resented taking instructions from someone they viewed as having slept her way into power. I overcompensated by working twice as hard as necessary, staying late, double checking every report, trying desperately to prove that I deserved the position on merit, even though deep down, both I and everyone around me knew the real reason behind my elevation to that position. My boss seemed to enjoy watching me grow into the role. He would praise my decisions and meetings, defer to my judgment on certain operational matters. By day, I was his trusted second in command. By night, his secret lover warming his bed in hotels and even in his car, and occasionally when his wife traveled, even at his own house. By my second year as assistant branch manager, my salary had improved significantly. Yes, my expenses had grown to match a lifestyle that the salary alone could never sustain. I had moved out of the shared room with my friend into a self-contained apartment in a slightly better part of town, the kind of place with a proper toilet inside, and not shared with anyone. Josh had helped me secure that apartment, paying the first year's rent upfront as a promotion gift. Though we both understood it was also a way of arranging where and how we could meet privately. I had also taken on financial responsibility for my younger siblings back home. Two of them still in secondary school. I paid their school fees, bought books, uniforms, and constant stream of requests that come from being the successful one in a Nigerian family. My mother, who had struggled alone to raise us after my father passed when I was 16, looked to me increasingly as the family's main support, not fully understanding the true source of the steady money I was now able to send home. I was like my family's savior and earned their respect. I was so happy for the woman I have become. And then there was the small hair salon I had to start, a salon space I rented not far from my apartment, hoping to build something that was entirely my own, something that didn't depend on Josh or the company. The equipment, the initial stock of hair products, the salary for the 2 girls I hired to help run it, all of this required capital I didn't have on my own. And so, predictably, I turned to Josh, and he settled everything. Josh was so generous. He never refused me. Not once did he say no to my financial requests. About 3 years into my employment and roughly 2.5 years into the affair, a girl named Sandra joined the company. Our HR introduced her to the rest of the staff during our Monday morning briefing. Sandra stood at the front of the small conference room, tall, fair-skinned, very curvy. Her shape was as if she did BBL. She had graduated with a degree in business administration from one of the federal universities, had done her youth service in a bank, and had 2 years of prior experience at another firm before joining us as an account officer. I won't pretend I didn't notice the competition between us immediately, because I did, painfully and instantly. Everything about her seemed to highlight everything I lacked. Her speech was polished, her vocabulary peppered with the kind of professional terminology that comes naturally to people who spent years in lecture halls rather than cyber cafes. Her CV, which I had to review as part of the onboarding process, listed credentials that made my own employment history look almost embarrassing by comparison. At first, I genuinely tried to like her, and for a while I did. She was respectful towards me, always addressing me properly despite our closeness in age, asking thoughtful questions when she needed clarification on processes, never displaying the kind of subtle disrespect some other staff members showed me because of how I had earned my position. I remember thinking in those early weeks that perhaps I had finally found someone in that office who saw me as a colleague rather than just Josh's side chick climbing the ladder through the bedroom. But soon things began to change. I noticed the changes gradually. Josh began staying back late in the evening, saying he needed to train the new staff, which was Sandra, on company procedures and client relationship management. At first, his explanation made sense. New employees genuinely do need extra guidance. And as a branch manager, it wasn't unreasonable for him to take a personal interest in training someone. I started noticing that he now closed his office door, which used to remain at least partially open during work hours as a matter of privacy. He began closing more frequently when Sandra was inside with him. I noticed the way his voice changed when he spoke to her in front of other staff, a warmth and lightness that I recognized immediately because it was the same calm voice he used to talk to me in the early days of our relationship. I told myself I was imagining things and thinking too much about it. I told myself that Josh loved only me and was in my palms. But Josh started complimenting Sandra openly. He had never been a manager who freely praised staff in front of others. He believed that excessive public praise created unhealthy competition and resentment among employees. Yet, within 2 months of Sandra's arrival, he began to compliment her work openly during meetings. I sat through those meetings with my professional smile carefully maintained, while internally something twisted painfully in my chest each time. I was dying of anger as he praised that girl called Sandra in my presence. One evening, staying back later than usual under the pretense of finishing a report, I witnessed something that confirmed every fear I had been trying to suppress. I had finished my work earlier than expected and was preparing to leave when I noticed Josh's office lights still on. I lingered near the staircase, telling myself I was simply checking that the office was properly secured before locking up. But really, I was watching, waiting to catch the both of them red-handed. I caught my beloved Josh and Sandra living together. About 20 minutes later, laughing at something I couldn't hear from my position, I watched Josh walk to his car and open the passenger door for Sandra, something he has never done for me in all our years together. We had always arrived and departed separately, always careful, always hidden. The fact that he felt comfortable enough to perform this act in the open parking lot where any staff member working late might witness it. I wanted to confront them immediately, but what could I even say? Dragging a married man with my colleague? Our boss for that matter. I stood in the shadow of the staircase long after their car had pulled out of the compound, feeling something cold and heavy settle in my stomach. I did not sleep that night or for many nights afterwards. I replayed every interaction I had witnessed between them. I called my best friend and told her everything. She advised me to take action. Babe, you better hold this man tight before this stupid Sandra will take him away from you. You better do something. I thought about what she said and started monitoring Josh and Sandra very well. The jealousy that consumed me during this period was unlike anything I had experienced before. I became aggressive to junior staff, snapping at a small mistake I would normally have corrected calmly. I lost weight. My appetite diminished by constant anxiety. I started checking Josh's phone whenever opportunity arose, something I had never done before in our relationship, scrolling through messages looking for evidence of what I feared. My heart pounding each time I heard footsteps approaching in case I was caught in the act. I was so worried that Sandra was slowly stealing Josh from me. I even caught them one day kissing in his office, but they had no idea I saw them. When I confronted Josh directly about him having an affair with Sandra, he denied everything with practiced ease, accusing me of being obsessed with him, of allowing insecurity to poison what we had built together. Jane, you are imagining things, he told me one evening, his voice carrying an edge of irritation that hadn't been there in our earlier years together. I cannot believe you are going through my phone like some jealous wife. Are you my wife? We are not married though. You are just my side chick. You don't have the right to police me like this. When I heard those words, I wanted to run mad. This same man that was licking my feet few years ago is now acting like I am nothing to him. I cried after that conversation alone in my apartment, the same apartment he had helped me to pay rent for, surrounded by furniture and comforts his money has purchased, suddenly feeling the full weight of how conditional and fragile my entire existence had become. I came up with an idea to fake a pregnancy and see if Josh still loves me just to see how he reacts. I used AI to fake a pregnancy test and sent it to him on WhatsApp. And within seconds, he sent me a 30-minute voice note telling me to get rid of it. You know I am married. I can't marry you. I will send you money to take care of it. I was so shocked. This was the same man that told me at the initial stage of our relationship that if I get pregnant, he would marry me. But here he was saying I should get rid of it. I was so angry that day, but still collected the money he sent me to get rid of the pregnancy. I held on to my composure for a few more weeks, watching the situation deteriorate further, watching Josh's attention towards Sandra grow more obvious even as he continued denying anything was happening between them. Eventually, the pressure building inside me reached a point where I could no longer maintain calmness anymore. I decided to confront Sandra because I could not take it anymore. The confrontation happened on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Most staff had stepped out for lunch, and Sandra remained behind to use the photocopying machine for some documents Josh had asked her to prepare. I found myself standing near the machine, waiting to use it myself. Though really, I had positioned myself there intentionally. It's not like I wanted to use the machine. Sandra, I said, keeping my voice low but unmistakably firm. I think we need to talk about something. She looked up from the documents in her hands, her expression polite but slightly wary, perhaps sensing from my tone that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. Of course, ma. What's on your mind? She said. I know what's going on between you and Oga Josh, I said. I'm not stupid and I am not blind. You need to back away from him. He's my man. Whatever he has promised you or made you believe, you need to stay away from him. She stared at me for a long moment and I watched something flicker across her face. A brief confirmation before she composed herself into careful denial. Ma, I don't know what you're talking about. My relationship with our boss is purely professional. Stay away from him, I repeated, my voice dropping even lower, taking on a tone I barely recognized as my own. Because if you don't, I will deal with you spiritually. Look, Sandra, don't try me. I am not someone you will toy with. You don't know who you are dealing with. Ask around about what happens to women who cross paths with people like me. Ask about me. You can't come here and eat from the fruit of my labor. I watched Sandra's face change, the careful professional composure cracking slightly to reveal genuine fear beneath it. She didn't respond immediately, simply gathered her documents and walked away without another word, but I could see, even from behind, the slight fear that had entered her movements. I felt a brief sickening sense of power in that moment, as if I had reclaimed some measure of control over a situation that had been steadily slipping from my grip. The weeks following my confrontation with Sandra did nothing to ease the situation. If anything, things grew worse. Their closeness continued, and if I'm honest, it seemed to deepen rather than retreat. I noticed Josh becoming more careful around me, more guarded, the way a man becomes when he senses someone watching him too closely. It was as if I was irritating him. I existed during this period in a state I can only describe as a slow unraveling. Sometimes I would cry until I had no tears left. Sometimes I would simply sit in the dark for hours, unable to summon the energy to even turn on the lights. It was during one of these low periods that I confided fully in my friend, a girl I had grown close to since my early days in Lagos. Someone who had her own complicated history with men and money, and the particular brand of desperation that comes from trying to survive in a city that doesn't care whether you sink or swim. I told her everything as usual. My sister, she said, you cannot just sit and watch this thing happen to you. You have already started the fight when you warned her. Now, you need to back your words with something real, or she will not take you serious, and you will lose everything you have built. I know someone who can help, a powerful man. He helped me when my boyfriend's family was trying to push me out of the relationship we had. Things changed completely after I went to see this man. I agreed to go see the man she called Baba Fashi the following Saturday. I told Josh I was visiting my sister for the weekend. The journey itself unsettled me in ways I hadn't anticipated. We left Lagos early in the morning, taking a bus to a town in Ogun State, whose name I won't disclose, then transferring to a smaller tricycle that took us down the bad road until we reached a compound set back from the main road, surrounded by tall trees and bordered by a low fence with palm fruits. I was so scared and shaken because I had never done a thing like this before. I even thought of going back. The compound itself felt like stepping into another world entirely, far removed from the Lagos I knew with its traffic and noise. Several shrines stood at various points around the compound, wrapped in red and white clothes, decorated with cowrie shells, calabash, and what looked like dried herbs and animal bones, arranged in patterns. I didn't understand and didn't ask about it. The air smelled of incense. Baba Fasha himself was an elderly man, perhaps in his 70s. Though his eyes held a sharpness, he wore simple white attire, beads around his neck and wrist, and when he looked at me as I approached, I felt an unsettling sense that he could see far more about my situation than I had told him, as if my desperation and guilt were written somewhere on my face in a language only him could read. We sat with him in a small room attached to the main compound, lit by a single lantern despite it being daytime, the windows covered by dark clothes that blocked most of the natural light. My friend introduced me, explained briefly that I needed help with a situation involving a man and a rival, and then, at his request, left the room so I could speak with him directly. I explained my situation as carefully as I could, conscious of presenting myself in the best possible light even in this context, omitting some of the more shameful details like the fake pregnancy, focusing instead on the basic facts. I told him how I loved Josh so much and wanted him back, telling him I wanted to deal with Sandra. Baba Fasha listened without interrupting, occasionally closing his eyes as though listening to something beyond my words. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "This thing you are asking," he said finally, "it's not a small thing. You want this woman to lose interest in Josh, your boss who is married. You want her to step back from your man and your position. This kind of work, it can be done, but it must be done carefully because spiritual matters always demand balance. What you send out must be sent with a clean enough purpose or it can backfire." I remember nodding along to his warning without fully absorbing its weight, too consumed by just dealing with Sandra to consider the danger he was describing. I asked him what he needed from me to proceed, and he gave me a list of items: a photograph, details about her full name and her place of origin, information I had gathered carefully over previous weeks. I also paid him money I had withdrawn from savings that included funds Josh had given me over the years, using his own money to fund an attack on the woman he had replaced me in his affection. We performed the ritual a few days later. The native doctor made some incantation. He burned herbs that produced a thick, disorienting smoke, made some weird markings on my skin with some kind of paste that smelled like dead rats. The smell was horrible, but I endured just to deal with Sandra. I remember feeling lightheaded throughout, whether from the smoke or simply the emotional and physical exhaustion of the situation. Baba Fasha told me once the ritual is concluded that the work had been sent and that I should expect to see changes within Sandra's behavior and she would start giving Josh distance within a matter of weeks. He warned me again, almost as an afterthought, to remain patient and to trust the process, repeating his earlier caution about the importance of clean intention. I returned to Lagos that Sunday evening, feeling a strange combination of relief and unease, a sense that I had finally taken action against a threat that had been tormenting me for weeks. I smiled to myself and said Sandra toyed with the wrong person. For the first few weeks afterward, nothing seemed to change. Josh's relationship with Sandra continued as it had. In fact, it grew stronger and Josh even stopped talking to me. I was so confused. I began to wonder whether the entire trip to the native doctor had been a waste, whether the native doctor was simply another opportunist preying on desperate women like myself, taking money for promises he had no real power to fulfill. Sandra would pass me every time at the office and just laugh without saying anything, like she knew what I did. Then almost exactly 1 month after the ritual, I woke up one morning to find my right leg slightly swollen. I didn't think much of it initially. I assumed it was a minor issue. Perhaps I had slept awkwardly or developed a mild allergic reaction to something I ate, or strained a muscle during my regular activities without fully noticing at the time. I went to work as usual that day, though by midday, the swelling had become worse and visible. The skin around my ankle was looking irritated, as if hot water had poured on my leg. By the end of that week, the swelling had progressed dramatically. My leg was now visibly bigger than its normal size, the skin taking on a strange thickened texture. I went to a hospital near my apartment, where the doctors ran several tests and said that they suspect skin infection, though none of the explanations seemed to fully account for how fast and severe my condition was getting. It was around this time, as I sat in my apartment one evening, my leg had gotten so big and was smelling like a dead body, dripping water. My mother, who had traveled to Lagos to check on me after hearing about my sickness, looked at my leg with an expression I would never forget, a mixture of fear, and said quietly, "Jane, this is not ordinary sickness. Tell me the truth. What have you been doing? Did you offend anybody in your workplace? Please tell me the truth." I cried that evening like a baby, confessing everything to my mother: my affair with my married boss, the native doctor I visited in Ogun State, how Sandra snatched Josh from me, all of it. I watched her face as I spoke, and she was so disappointed in me. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long time before finally speaking. "My daughter," she said, her voice heavy with grief, "the juju you sent out didn't meet its targets. That was why it backfired at you instead. This is not a small matter. We need to find help. Real help, before this thing consumes you completely." I returned back to the native doctor twice, more in the weeks that followed, this time with my mother accompanying me, both of us desperate for answers. desperate for some way to reverse whatever had been done. I remember the second visit most vividly because it was the visit where he finally told me what he believed had happened to me. The girl you sent this juju for has covering you don't know about. She has family protection. She has her family's spiritual work standing as a wall to protect her. When the thing you send cannot enter where it's pointed, it doesn't simply disappear. It looks for the next available door, and the next available door is usually the sender, because the sender is the one holding the original connection to the work. I looked at him with tears in my eyes and asked him why he didn't warn me about the powers protecting Sandra. He said he thought it wasn't powerful. I was so scared and tired. I felt like killing myself. Imagine what I did to myself because of another person's husband. Josh's wife had no idea God was fighting for her. I placed my hand on my head and shouted, "Ritual gone wrong." The native doctor offered to perform additional rituals to reverse the damage, each requiring additional money I would pay, not even pitying my condition. This stupid man was still requesting for more money. My mother and I returned twice to him, bringing more money to him to cure my leg, but my leg continued to worsen. I don't know whether what happened to my leg was truly the result of failed spiritual work or whether it was some unrelated medical condition. I have heard of conditions like elephantiasis that occur for purely biological reasons, unrelated to any spiritual cause. But I have also grown up in a culture where these things are taken seriously, where my own mother, an educated church-going woman, looked at my swollen leg and immediately recognized it as spiritual backlash. I regretted my life. I could not walk properly again. The time I would have used to better my life and go to school, I was using it to sleep with a married man and going to do juju for another woman. I even heard my position was given to Sandra. Josh never bothered to call me after hearing about my leg. I relocated back to my hometown about 4 months ago, unable to afford Lagos rent without steady income. My mother has been caring for me since I returned home. I lost all my savings to treatment and yet no change. I am so depressed. Has anyone here experienced this condition before? I need help on how to cure myself. I'm even thinking of begging Sandra to forgive me. Please help assist and advise me on what to do. I would genuinely appreciate any honest guidance anyone can offer. Please, no one should judge me because nobody is perfect. Wow, what a long story. What a very long and funny story. You were having an affair with your boss at work, and then another lady came. You went to fight another lady because of another person's husband. Like, the whole thing is just so funny. I don't know what to say. Please, you people should advise her. But to me, I would advise her to go to a church, to meet a pastor, because this is spiritual. She needs prayers. So what do you think about the story? Advise her in the comment section. Write your thoughts, and please remember to like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, share this story with your loved ones, and remember to turn on the notification bell so that whenever I post, you get notified. Here I share true life stories about people's experience. These are not made up stories. So if this is what you like, please stick around, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you on my next video. So bye for now. Bye.